My name is Jeff Cowton. I'm sitting in Dove Cottage, the building we now know as Dove Cottage anyway, once the home of William and Dorothy Wordsworth, of Mary Wordsworth, of their children, between the years of 1799 and 1808. It's a room that they knew as the kitchen. As you can see, it's panelled in dark wood, and it's been the scene of a number of moments in literary history, mentioned in Dorothy's journal, but also when in 1807 a young admirer, a 22-year-old man, paid a visit to the Wordsworths, and who in the 1830s recorded this visit and the scenes of this room in a magazine of that period. This same person came back in 1809 and became the next tenant of Dove Cottage. He lived here, or at least had the house, for 25 years or so, lived in it for much of that time. And it was during this time too that he published an account of his life that became one of the best-selling books of the 1820s. His name, of course, was Thomas de Quincey, and it was in the 1810s that another scene took place in here that involved a man that de Quincey referred to as the Malay. In the room there was de Quincey, there was the Malay, there was a servant, and there was a young child from one of the neighbouring houses. And whether or not it took place, we can never be sure, but we do get a good description of that moment from de Quincey's book, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. The servant who opened the door to him was a young girl, born and bred amongst the mountains, who'd never seen an Asiatic dress of any sort. In a cottage kitchen, but panelled on the wall with dark wood that from age and rubbing resembled oak, and looking more like a rustic hall of entrance than a kitchen, stood the Malay, his turban and loose trousers of dingy white relieved upon the dark panelling. So, as you can see, the room much the same as de Quincey describes it. I addressed him in some lines from the Iliad, considering that of such languages as I possessed, Greek, in point of longitude, came geographically nearest to an Oriental one. He lay down upon the floor for an hour and then pursued his journey. On his departure, I presented him with a piece of opium. I was struck with some little consternation when I saw him suddenly raise his hand to his mouth and, to use the schoolboy phrase, bolt the whole, divided into 3 pieces, at one mouthful. The quantity was enough to kill 3 dragoons and their horses, and I felt some alarm for the poor creature. He took his leave, and for some days I felt anxious, but as I never heard of any Malay being found dead, I became convinced that he was used to opium, and that I must have done him the service I designed by giving him one night of respite from the pains of wandering. But whether or not, as we say, whether it happened or not, it became the subject of de Quincey's dreams. Opium, well, we have here an opium balance. This opium balance belongs to a case, a wooden case, which has the name de Quincey inscribed on it. So we may assume that this balance was his, and you can see that at one end is the pan for opium, and at the other is the token, which acts as the counterweight. So wonderful to think, maybe, that is de Quincey's balance used in this house. Opium began for de Quincey, of course, as a thing of happiness. Happiness that could be bought for a penny and stored in the waistcoat pocket. Portable ecstasies that might be corked up in a pint bottle. But the ecstasies became nightmares. He was kissed, he says, with cancerous kisses by crocodiles, and laid confounded with all unutterable slimy things. And the account, his experiences, the confessions, appeared in the London Magazine, which is here, and this was published in 1821 as a magazine article and created such an impact that the second part soon followed. The following year, this article became a book, and here is that first edition, published without an author's name on the title page. I hope that can be seen. Very simple title page, and this may be a publisher's binding of that first edition. And then, perhaps best of all, the manuscript of part one of the Confessions. As I say, not written in Dove Cottage itself, written in London. It comes in many parts. This is part one, but even in part one there are several parts to it, if you can see the different types of paper, written in different moments, and then sent to the printer to be compiled into the book. It's typical of De Quincey. The writing is spidery. There are many crossings out, sometimes with shorthand, abbreviations in here as well. And it also, we've had this manuscript maybe for 30 years now, and maybe in this light you can just see that there is a number of stains. There are a number of stains on the pages, and when we bought the manuscript, the auction catalogue suggested, perhaps that's a little darker one that you can see, the auction catalogue suggested that these may be opium stains from an obvious source. I had the privilege of taking this manuscript to a top secret place to be tested, and of course, disappointingly maybe, the stains were found to have been caused by spillages of coffee rather than spillages of opium, and that makes perfect sense. The manuscript bears all the hallmarks of the places of its origin, written in the coffee houses of London as De Quincey moved from place to place to avoid those to whom he owed